The two championship contenders giving it everything.
No, Mikey. No, Mikey.
It's lights out.
No, Mikey.
And away we go.
All right, what's going on, everybody? I think we're still good. What's going on, Gager? I just got to turn off this song. There we go. Song's done. We're good.
There we go.
A little rusty on the Pitstop Pals. We are the only two people in Canada in the middle of the NHL playoffs in a market that still has a team going who are like, you know what we should do on an off night? We should talk about the Miami Grand Prix. But here we are, and lots of reason to do it. I mean, Lando Norris, top of the podium for the first time in his Formula One career, and what was actually really good race. I mean, a lot of different places, Gager. I thought that was an outstanding, like definitely one of the best races we had in a year. But and maybe it's just because Max isn't at the top, but I thought it was one of the best races we've seen in quite some time.
Well, yeah. I mean, I thought it would be the race itself would just be what we've become accustomed to over the last few. But I mean, the only thing I thought that would be interesting, obviously, is the star power of Miami and the grid walks, and just the underlying Adrian Newey retiring, so to speak, because in the pre-interviews we had Lewis talking about how he would love to work with him in Ferrari, so the subtle little hints there. But then you get to the actual race, Dusty, and I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen with Cash App. Ricardo, he manages to pull out a fourth place in the sprint, and we'll get to it. But the race itself was the best race of the year with the amount of passing that was done. The almost crash from Checo taking out Max right off the hop. It was unbelievable. I love this race. I completely unexpected, but thoroughly enjoyable.
Gager, is that like the racetrack that led to that, the setup that led to that? What do you think was the main driver behind that?
Well, they talk about it lots. Is the reliability of the cars too. So I heard some of the experts saying in years past, you'd at least get a few DNFs just because the cars would break down. There's so much reliability with these cars now that the chance for points is a lot greater, especially on a street circuit where there's a lot of walls. Although we didn't see too many crashes, but there's always the opportunity to stay in the race till later, and you never know. There could be penalties, points. We saw what happened to Carlos Sainz almost losing his position to Lewis Hamilton by a couple thousandths, I think, by the end of it, because he took a penalty for the hit with Oscar, I believe, in the race. So there's always the possibility of points. I hope that they get to a place where points are awarded from 10 to 20 as well, so guys are still trying to
that'd
fight,
be interesting. Is that out there, or is that just idea you have?
Yeah, that's Crofty. I was listening to Crofty, and he had a few what he would do to improve F1, and that was one of the things that he said, just because sometimes maybe qualifying doesn't go your way, you're stuck further back in the grid. It's not just a wasted weekend at that point. You'd still, and not that you don't see still a lot of hard racing. I think we even in that 10 through 20, you see guys still battling.
Yeah.
But I think you'd see even way more if you could actually construct a point system where you're still getting points for those places too. And at the end of the year, it would make it a lot more interesting, I think.
Well, like right now, there's no difference between 13th and 18th. But if you put points up for grabs, I mean, that's gonna probably drive. I mean, it's just natural human instincts to drive people to go a little bit harder in those spots, which I think would end up being a pretty good idea. Now, when as we were watching this race, like as Lando ended up hanging on and winning, and we'll get to how he did it, and when the safety car left, Max was right there, wasn't able to overtake him, and then Lando sort of just pulled away. So we'll get to all of that, but just the celebration and how emotional it was for Lando. McLaren had only one win in the last 12 years, which was Danny Ricciardo. Zach Brown, I mean, he was hugging everybody that he could possibly hug. It was, I mean, I was happy. Like, I was smiling. I wasn't tearing up, but I was like kind of emotionally happy to see those guys get a victory in that spot. That was very cool to see.
Well, it was the whole lead up to it as well. Like, I jumped in Lando's helmet cam to listen to him, and it was hilarious because he was swearing and stuff, but thanking everyone, and you could hear him, and he said, "I'm not going to cry. I don't cry." But then you saw the cars go by him, and do their congratulatory.
Yes.
Like, you saw Max clapping his hands, Lewis, when he got out of the car. Alonso was one of the first guys to come up to him, and George. But then you see the jump into his pit crew, and then they lift him up like he's at a rock concert.
Yeah, I thought he was going to get hurt.
Right? I know. I was
This
like,
guy just got out of an F1 car. Like, give him a break.
Well, and plus he didn't crash his bike, and his face is all mashed up too. Like,
yeah.
he's got his Band-Aids on his face, but it just. Yeah, I got caught up in the whole emotional thing. I mean, what is it? 110 starts, right? That was his 110th start to finally get his first Grand Prix win. And, and Hinchcliffe said in the post race, like, it's kind of a turning point now for a driver to finally, that's a long time to not get a victory, be on the podium, but not finish first. And maybe you start wondering, gosh, am I ever going to be able to do this? Am I ever going to win a race? But now I think with what we've seen with Lando, I mean, one of the most consistent drivers, but just with inferior equipment, essentially, until the latter part of last year and into this year. Now we can see what he can really do, because with those upgrades, Dusty, that McLaren was lightning, and he was pulling away. Max was losing time in the corners to a McLaren. And when have we've never said that.
Well, I mean, I think it was earlier in the race when they're telling Max to keep going, don't manage the tires, because Piastri is pushing the pace on him right now, right? Like, I hadn't heard that all year, where somebody's like, they're telling Max, keep her down because McLaren's catching you. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? So, I mean, the upgrade's obviously making a major difference, Gager. And when it comes to this victory itself, we talked about, got the pit stop, safety car, Max is right there. We've seen this. I mean, usually Max is at the front, but we've seen pretty much any time in the last 2 years, if he's behind you on a restart, it's just a matter of time until he gets by you, and then it's bye-bye, see you later. You're in the rearview mirror the rest of the race. How much of this was Norris hanging on to it, McLaren and the upgrades, and what was off with Max? It seemed like something was off.
When you look at, I mean, still, it was a pretty good weekend for Red Bull as a whole.
Oh yeah.
But it was interesting because when he went to the hard tires, that's when the car seemed to become unbalanced, and through the whole weekend, the hards weren't working well for Red Bull. So that, and I don't know, did that cone have that big of a difference to the front wing when he hit it there? I think it probably wasn't great, but then again, you kind of look at the overall, the whole timings of the race. The McLarens were the best car in that. I mean, without that safety car, it would have, Oscar kind of lost out at that point, and obviously the damage to his car and having to come in for that and replace the front wing. But man, that's I don't know. We'll see next race. I'm sure Red Bull will get everything. They're always masters of getting their car in the right window for the actual race itself. And now we're going back to the traditional 3 practice sessions and qualifying. So lots of time to dial it in right. But I'm interested to see. Let's because we're getting back to an actual racetrack. What does the McLaren look like next to the Red Bull? Because I mean, the times themselves in qualifying for the main race, I think it was only like 0.6 that separated 1 through 6. That's pretty tight to where usually you see Max kind of a little bit more ahead than everyone else.
It is Nielsen Gager. It is the Pitstop Pals as we continue to break down Lando Norris finishing at the top of the podium. You mentioned not a bad weekend for Red Bull either, Gager. But when you look at these upgrades for McLaren, I know there's going to be more coming along the way. Is the rest of the pack and I guess I shouldn't say the rest of the pack because we'll talk about the Williams and some of these other groups after. But are these top ends, with the exception of Mercedes, I guess, McLaren would be the one that's moving the needle the most. Ferrari, I believe there's some upgrades coming here as well. Are they closing the gap on Red Bull a little bit at this point of the season, do you think? Or is that just like wishful thinking on my part?
I think you have to. I mean, last year at this time, Max was winning by 28 seconds. There were 40 seconds at times. This year, the gap seems to have closed a little bit. Traditionally, once they move back to Europe and start doing the European circuit, this is where a lot of those upgrades start coming in for most of the cars. So I don't know. I think they've closed the gap a little bit, Dusty, up to this point, but we're really going to know over the next month or so who's really close. And because Red Bull's going to bring something too. They're going to keep developing their car as well. So I predict they're going to get a little bit better. But with some of these other cars now going back to Europe, this is where the rubber really hits the road with the upgrades to see if they got the concept right. And with 2026 and the new rules and the changes coming in, they're obviously cars are looking to the next evolution phase of these vehicles too. So I don't know. I can't really answer that until I see what happens in Europe and see if they've closed it on one lap pace at least. Let's say that. But overall race pace, Red Bull's still king of the hill.
Big Uke sliding into the nasty chat here as we hit the Pitstop Pals live on Edmonton Sports Talk's YouTube channel. This is a good question, Gager. I think you're better apt to answer this one than I am if you can. What kind of upgrade is made that can make the biggest difference? That's a good question because we see them all upgrade. They upgrade. Some of them upgrade some bigger elements of the car. Some of them make minor upgrades that we would never notice in a million years anyway. What do you think would be the answer to that question, Gager? Even if you could take a guess at it, like a run at it.
Well, you always see, like, for those of you like me that are obsessed with F1 TV and see the little subtle little adjustments they make, little bits here or there. But I think the true upgrades come from the things that we don't see. And for everything that they've said, it's the floor. It's the adjustments to the floor, tweaks here, tweaks there of what they can develop or increase. So those are the types of things that a lot of times we don't even see up to this point. That's where I think you see the biggest difference. Obviously, track to track too, depending on if more downforce is required. You look at the fins on the back, how they're constructed, there was even a little bit with the cockpit themselves. There was, I believe, in the Mercedes car, they had extra little bits that came out to just push the wind over in a different direction. I mean, that can be the difference in tenths, but I think it's, for the most part, the upgrades that we don't see make the biggest difference to the cars. Unfortunately, we don't find those out to the end of the year.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the rest of the field. Obviously, Lando, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc. I think what did I see there? Is it Charles Leclerc's finished top 4 in every single race so far this season? I mean, there's a level of consistency there with Ferrari, Gager, that we didn't necessarily see the last few years, whether it was self-inflicted wounds or just the car letting them down.
Like the change of leadership, Dusty, and Freddie Vasseur coming in. I think that's when everything changed with Ferrari. So a whole new view. I mean, we watched the Drive to Survive. They weren't too keen on a non-Italian coming in and taking over the team, but I got to say, they're getting strategy right. Their consistency with the car and they're a team that said they're not bringing upgrades until they get back to to Europe here. So that's interesting to see, especially with Carlos driving so well too, right? Leclerc doesn't seem to be having those moments where everything's going well and he makes a mistake. So yeah, that consistency level with Ferrari, hopefully they can kind of challenge a little bit more. They're there on one lap pace, but it's just that overall race pace that needs to be, that gap needs to be closed if they want to really get into that second place and challenge for constructors championships.
Some other storylines to work through the top 10, and we'll get to Sonoda and we'll get to Esteban Ocon, both being in the top 10. Sonoda finishing 7th. But Lewis Hamilton finishes 6th, gets 8 points out of that. But it has clearly been identified this year, Gager, that Mercedes is the 4th best team on the circuit right now, which last year I think there was a little bit more debate that, look, they can still push here, they can still push there. We saw where they finished last year in the overall standings. They have taken another step back this year, and Lewis Hamilton must be just very excited to get out of there and go join Ferrari.
And that was, George Russell kind of an oh-hum season, wouldn't you say, Dusty? Like, he's not really, and I know it's a little bit of the car, but
I mean, how many times
really
have we come on here and talked about George Russell? I know this is only our 4th episode of the season, but I don't think we've really talked about him in a glowing light yet at all.
Nothing. But I do have to say I did enjoy Lewis Hamilton's race. And David Coulthard was talking about, he's not in the best machinery. He's not in the best car, but you're starting to see that kind of punchy Lewis. There was a lot of wheel-to-wheel racing, a lot of overtakes from Lewis Hamilton. He's scratching and clawing as much as he can, and that was just for 6th place, right?
Yeah.
So seeing Lewis kind of fight, at least in that 4th kind of best car, so I like it. I think that suits well for him going to Ferrari, that by all accounts is a better car right now, and seeing him in better equipment is exciting to me. I want to see what that looks like. But no, it's amazing that they seem to, they changed the concept finally and went in a different direction. That whole thing with Lewis saying, "I told you so." He must look at these Ferraris and just go, "I can't wait to get into that car at this point." I have to do so much with the Mercedes just to be in the top 10, just to get through qualifying. It's enough with Mercedes. He's done. He's probably completely fed up, but he had the Met Gala, so I'm sure he's okay.
McLaren has 124 points in the constructor standings. That is almost double Mercedes in the 4th spot. Like right now, Mercedes' true concern should be Aston Martin being just 22 points back of them and basically just rolling with a one-driver team all the time. Nothing against Lance Stroll, but it's mostly Fernando Alonso there. What a weekend for RB. Sonoda finishes 7th. Danny Ricciardo fought as hard as he could to hold some of those guys off on that sprint race. I was waiting. It was Sainz who was behind him, right? Sainz is all over him. Couldn't get by him. What's going on here? I know I texted you. We're like, Danny Rick, what the hell? How's this happening right now? And Gager, once again, it's that classic U word, upgrades.
Yeah. The chassis, he was arguing about the chassis, got that replaced. Upgrades came all of a sudden. I mean, Yuki, this is the most interesting thing, and I think he gets passed over a lot, but what's going to happen with Yuki Tsunoda, Dusty? I mean, if anyone has put in, questions into the Red Bull team of that seat, I got time to see Yuki in that second Red Bull seat. He's definitely, up to this point, he's outperformed Ricciardo. Sergio, Checo's kind of, it seems like history's repeating itself a little bit with him. Good start, right? But now we see, he's still second, but now, like, Leclerc's only 5 points back from him now, and you want to get that construct. They want the 1-2 for sure, but this is where it seems like Checo sometimes just falters a little bit, and other drivers start passing him. So if Yuki Tsunoda can keep performing like this and getting results in that top 10, I don't see why you wouldn't give him a shot. He's matured. He's not as hot-headed as he was a few years ago. But yeah, I definitely have time for it right now, seeing how well he's performed at the start of this year so far.
Gager, what else do we got coming out of the Miami Grand Prix that we haven't hit on yet? I know Esteban Ocon finishes in the top 10. Rare point there right now for that team this season. What else?
Yep. Well, the one thing is I think we got to touch on is the Logan Sargent situation.
Yes.
So DNF cost the team some money. And there was talk with Andrea Kimi Antonelli. He's the young driver for Mercedes. Yeah, and all like Toto. There was talks of Toto talking about him actually taking Lewis's seat because
like just straight up, like he's going to be their number 2 guy with George. Yeah.
Well, the reasoning is way back when they did have a shot at Max, right? And they passed it up for a more experienced driver. So maybe now George, a few more years, he becomes the senior guy, bringing up the young one. But Voles did say there was talk that Logan Sargent would be out of that seat in Imola. He's confirmed now that Sargent will be driving for Williams in Imola, but I think the leash has become even shorter, and all this talk with Antonelli possibly getting into that Williams and seeing what he can do, and if there's any sort of performance there, because it's not a bad car. Like we see what Albon did. Like it's just Logan Sargent hasn't been performing. He can get in there and have some, maybe some good races, maybe getting a few points here and there. I don't see why Mercedes doesn't give a shot to a younger guy too.
Well, I want to talk about the bottom of the grid here, because you've got Sauber, you've got Williams, and Alpine just getting their first point. I mean, even if Haas has 7 points or whatever, like they've separated themselves from these other 3 teams. Which one of these is in the worst spot, do you think, Gager?
I think Kick Sauber. They, from pit stops to, just underperforming car, the whole change, it seems like to me, Desi, that they're just waiting for Audi to take over, and there's no focus over with these drivers, and just lackluster performances. You always see them at the back, even when they're challenging. We saw what happened to Bottas with the 30-second pit stop or what have you. I love the look of the car. I think it looks great, but that's about it, right? We're just kind of ho-humming it until the new bosses come in and see what they can do, and even to their drivers without drives, so who knows what's going to happen to them. They're the biggest disappointment. I thought there would be a little bit more steps. I'd love to see Valtteri kind of battle again and get up there and do some damage, but not both of them. Just, I don't.
The ultimate example, like since we started watching Formula One with the first season of Drive to Survive, of what a car can do for you, right? Bottas rolling as the number 2 in Mercedes, was winning, was pushing Lewis sometimes, and then works his way down to the tire fire that they're in right now. And it's so close. We're talking mere seconds for the entire field. But still, that's a huge difference in a sport like auto racing, man.
Like what is it? Haas is, they only have the 1 point, right? But for Sauber, not for Haas to be ahead of you, and not only just in the standings, but the actual race itself. Like you see Hulkenberg, consistently in Q3, Magnussen in those, like he's close to the point.
They're in the middle of the pack, right?
Yeah, they're way close to challenging for points, although it's only 1 right now.
They have 7. Haas has 7. Alpine has 1. They just got 1.
Okay.
Like the other 3 had none heading into this race. So Haas is kind of in no man's land. They're 12 points back of RB, and they're ahead of all these other bums.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at the driver standings there. Yeah, so like it's very disappointing to see you tied with Williams there and Haas that much ahead. But like I said, again, they're not even close to Haas at this point, I don't think, in the race, because they're challenging for, that 10th, 9th, 10th spot pretty consistently over the last, or the start of the season.
So we have to wait 2 weeks for Imola, hey? And I saw Big Hugh asking, where is it? It's in Italy. They go to Italy next in a couple of weeks. And
so it's Cash App Arby's. That's where their factory is. That's kind of their home race, so to speak. So I'd look for Yuki he's familiar with the track. Look for him to do something special for your fantasy teams for sure.
There they go. The little fantasy advice from Gager here on the Pitstop Pals. All right, that is going to do it for the fourth episode of the season, the Miami Grand Prix recap. We'll be back in a few weeks after we see what happens in Imola. I'm sure there'll be lots to break down. That's back-to-back race weeks as well. So we'll certainly get into that. Gager, it's been great being in the box with you, buddy.
Yeah, we'll get to the hockey stuff later.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Oilers in 6, yada, yada, yada. Pitstop Pals. Had to sneak one in. Talk to you later, man.
Okay, buddy. Later.
The 2 championship contenders giving it everything.
No, Mikey. No, Mikey.
It's lights out.
No, Mikey.
And away we go.